Time to elevate.
Hey everybody, welcome to Running on Empty. I am Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we are running on empty. And man, I am excited about our interview today. This show is going to be a whole lot of fun.
I'm excited too because we have a guy that millions and millions of people have heard the voice.
Yeah.
And today they're going to be able to say, oh, that's the guy.
That's the guy, yeah.
This is the guy.
Yeah,
so let's hear about him, man.
His name is Randy West. He's a great friend and colleague, and it has been an honor to get to know him and share the stage with him. Before we dive into the show, here's a little background on Randy. Randy is an industry legend with over 47 shows and hundreds of other announcing projects to his credit, including shows like Big Brother, The Newlywed Game, Deal or No Deal, The Weakest Link, Supermarket Sweep, Card Sharks, and The Price is Right. He was inspired and mentored into a career in broadcasting by the legendary television announcer Johnny Olson. And he's got a great book about Johnny Olson as well. I was first behind a microphone while still in his teens as an afternoon drive personality at WRNW FM in suburban New York City. Once he earned his bachelor's degree, Randy eventually found a home at KMGG Magic 106 in Los Angeles. He has got so many credits, it would take us hours to actually list them all. So we're going to jump right into things. But one of the things that I got to tell you that is Randy got to share the stage with Bob Barker on The Price is Right, and I've gotten to share the stage with Randy. He's introduced me a few times, and I'm telling you what an honor that is. Randy, you got a book out there called Johnny Olson, A Voice in Time, and you got a new one coming out in 2021, which we're going to get to a little bit into the show. Randy, my friend, it is great to see you. It's been a little bit of time. It's been about a year since we've actually done work together, but thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Well, normally one has to die to get such positive people speaking about you in such kind terms and so warmly. But I'm very much alive, and so are you, even though this pandemic thing has been absolutely crazy. So it's good to see you. Tony, great to meet you, and a pleasure to be on the show with you guys.
It's an honor, Randy. Thank you for being here.
I guess before we get into some of the questions, about your career and what's been going on with, with Hollywood, how you been? I mean, like I said, it's been a year. We shared the stage literally a year ago, Thanksgiving, and now here we are, end of 2020. I don't think either of us has done anything. So what's been going on?
I've been doing stuff at home. Thankfully,
Good.
People don't want to see me, but they want to hear me. So that works to my benefit. So I've been working on Big Brother. This is the third season. I've done some little voices for them. I'm not the show announcer, but I'm like, hello, housemates. It's time for this challenge or that challenge, that kind of
thing. Sure. Cool.
So it's great to work from home, again, because nobody really wants to see me. You're the one person on earth that I know that if I show up face and all, you'll actually take me in, feed me a saucer of milk, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, of course. So I think I want to start by asking you. Let's talk a little bit about your first book. I read the book, and what an inspiration to be able to be mentored and taught by the great Johnny Olson. What was that like?
Well, he had no kids of his own, which I think, I'm not that particularly wonderful, but he took a liking to me. And it must be because he had no kids with a misplaced fraternal instinct. But he saw somebody who was passionate about the business, and he gave me just a truckload of information and insight. Never got me a job, but did everything but get me the job, telling me how to do what it is he does. And for those who don't know, Johnny Olson was the guy who most folks remember from Come On Down. He was the announcer on The Price is Right who created that slogan, created that phrase. And he had been a host in early television. He went back to the beginnings of radio, believe it or not. He had a 58-year career, and he was the king of game show announcing. When I was a kid in New York, I used to cut classes and go down to 30 Rock and watch them tape television shows. And, in New York in the winter, New Yorkers are not known for being the kindest, most outgoing, gregarious people. Especially when they stand in line in the rain for an hour. Yes, you had to stand in line. Audiences always do. But in New York, there was no facility for it. So when you get into the studio, everybody's got a coat and an umbrella. There's no place to hang them or put them. There's no coat room, So they're putting their coats on the floor. there's just a lot of attitude in the room. While now that we're sitting, something better happened, that kind of a thing. And out comes this guy who goes, "Oh, how's everybody?" And he's jumping up and down the aisles. And within seconds, this group of people who, got a chip on their shoulder are all laughing and giggling together. And he would break down inhibitions and charm a studio audience in a matter of moments. He could turn people 180 degrees. He was masterful at audience warm-up. And it was for that reason people like Jackie Gleason, who once did a show with him the first time. It was a show called You're in the Picture. And from that moment on, anytime Jackie Gleason went on television, he insisted on having Johnny Olson do the audience warm-up. And that included flying Johnny to Miami when he did that show from the Sun and Fun Capital World, Miami Beach. So Johnny would have to leave the match game in Los Angeles with a hard out, meaning you got to get this guy off the stage by a certain time so he could catch a plane and go do Jackie Gleason every week. Wow. He was that masterful as a warm-up personality. And if you ever remember, number one, what is your name, please? And come on down, and all those great phrases. If you remember, he had a wonderful voice, perfectly suited for television, because in the old days, we didn't have a stereo system hooked up to our TV. It was tiny little tinny speakers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he had a perfect voice for just cutting through. And his energy and enthusiasm were infectious. So I was very lucky to meet him, have an interest in the business. And the first time I knew he was taking me seriously was he said, "Anybody in the audience want to give me a glass of water?" And, 5 hands go up. And he picked me because we've been talking already. And he said, "Oh, come down here." And he gives me an empty styrofoam. No, there was no styrofoam those days. It was like a coffee cup, a paper cup.
Sure.
It was, go out over here, use that door, make a left. When you get to the water fountain, don't use that water. That water's not good. I want you to use that water. I want you to get up the stairs, go up 3 flights, then make a hard left, then make a right. And while he's making this description of things that can't possibly be followed in anybody's head, turn right, turn left, go up, go down. I'm like scratching my head, acting it out, sort of like, no, just go and get me the water. So I walked off the stage, and I don't know what the hell to do now because I'm standing in the wings. He obviously didn't want me to go do all this. So I don't know. Do I stand here? What do I do? I'm 14 years old. And he says, "Where's that kid with my water?" Well, that must be a cue for me to come back. Even at age 4, somebody could figure that out. So I start stepping out on the stage, and he says, "Be careful, don't trip over the cape." And as he said, "Don't trip over the cape," I made like I tripped over the cable. I didn't fall on the floor, but I made like tripped and oops. And I had an empty cup of water, and he turned it up and down. And he said, "You spilled it all when you tripped over it. Go back to your seat." And the audience laughed because I put a hangdog expression on my face and kind of shuffled back to my seat, embarrassed. And the audience laughed, and that moment was the defining moment of my life.
Wow.
Television, I watched TV, we all did, but that was the moment that I felt, holy Jesus, this is powerful. This is amazing. I've got to know how to do this. And Johnny gave me all his secrets.
Wow. Well, you
That's
definitely
amazing.
have the gift as well. Just from seeing you in action with The Price is Right live, and being introduced by you and watching what you do for the audiences before I walk out on stage. That's a skill that very, very few people have. And knowing who you've worked with and who you've introduced and been on television with and announced with, and then to be able to come out on stage hearing that same voice, that's pretty neat. And you honestly make my job easy, man. I mean, seriously, I walk out on stage, you got them all jazzed up, and then I ask them who wants to win a new car, and they all scream, and I'm like, "You're at the wrong show, man."
Well, you do an incredible show, and if I didn't get them to that level, you'd have them there 30 seconds later.
Oh, thank you, man.
You really have a great day with the contestants.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that we can get back to that in 2021 because creative people having time off is not good.
Yeah.
Not good at all.
Like the Tin Man and the Wizard of Oz.
Well, we are slowly but surely, coming back. And have you kind of seen anything like that in, like heard anything or kind of heard some grumblings behind the scenes as to what, when is Hollywood coming back? I mean, I know some things are going, but what's the forecast look like?
Well, once you adapt to the new protocols, which is amazing. I mean, only A people get to be on the set, people who used to hang around and sit in the wings. They're off the set entirely now. Everybody's wearing a mask and a face protector, the plastic thing. And you're not allowed to get within so many feet of the talent unless you're actually handing them something. It's very, very tight. There's no audiences for most shows. If you've seen The Price is Right, there's nobody in the audience. There is no audience. Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, no audiences. Those are all sweetened with sound of an audience from, I don't know, it's an audience that they're all dead now. It's recordings from 1950, I guess. All those people are dead if you watch those shows.
Yeah.
But seriously, because we've taken these protocols, the state of California has considered us essential. Because if they lose the movie and TV industry, they've lost the backbone of the economy.
Yeah,
so even though restaurants are closing, we could be next door in a tent being fed food. But our distance is, we're all tested every day, that kind of stuff. So there is production happening. But without audiences, I don't get called that often if it's just announcing I'm working from home. And frankly, if everybody's infected, I'm a lot happier at home.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say, it's got to be easy to warm up an audience without anybody there, right?
I would do that for the money, And I've worked with some audiences where I wish there were people there, and they weren't, but I couldn't tell. I wanted to put a mirror under each person's nose to see if there was any life, But the industry is going full tilt, even though we're not essential in some people's thinking we are through the economy. And that's pissing off restaurant owners, frankly.
Oh, sure. Wow. Randy, you got started in radio, and I'm from New York, and I heard somewhere, I'm sure it's in your book too, you started off listening to people like Cousin Brucey in New York, who I listened to when I was a kid. And can you describe for our audience, especially for our younger audience, what it was like putting on the radio and hearing a guy like Bruce Morrow or Wolfman Jack or any number of, these guys were radio personalities.
That's the word.
Right. What was it like putting on the radio and hearing these guys back in the day?
Well, it was a cultural thing. There was no FM. There existed an FM band, but nobody listened to FM in the 60s. Most of those stations were playing beautiful music or were just simulcasting what was on the AM. So you only had like 3 stations that kids would listen to in a big market. In a secondary market, it might only be 2, So every kid would be listening to the same disc jockey.
That's right.
At the same time. So what he said, what he did, the records he played, the ones he liked, or when he talked about something, the next day that was like water cooler talk around school. Did you hear what Brucey said last night? Because we were all listening to the same.
That's right.
People, right? And every city had these people. If you were in Chicago, it was Dick Biondi. It was Joey Reynolds in Buffalo. It was the real Don Steele in Los Angeles, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a bunch of these guys, and what made radio different then from radio now is these guys, as you said, were personalities. They didn't come on and say, it's 22 past the hour, we got a great song for you, there's always 5 in a row here at KXOK and whatever. Now, Brucey, as you know, and folks who haven't heard it before, Brucey would go, hi, everybody, is your cousin Brucey? Take my hand, the music's going to be grand. All right, we got people listening Flatbush High today. Flatbush High, hello to everybody at Flatbush. Hey, I like Brooklyn. Brooklyn's my home. Hey, you kids in the Bronx, don't feel bad now. Now, listen, we got a great song for you. I'm ready to come out and see you at Palisades Park Saturday. Tell your mom and dad you got to go to Palisades Park. It's only the beginning. Keep your motor spinning. There's Brucey, WABC, my friends.
You got
and
it.
He would just motor mouth like that, and it was all very exciting. Even though nothing he said could be etched in stone, you felt like if you weren't listening to this guy, you were missing something.
Well, the other thing, Randy, that I appreciated about those guys, they were, I guess the word I would use is multi-generational. You could be in the room with your dad and your mom and be listening to Cousin Brucey. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think we've kind of lost it. Everyone is so segmented now, right?
Exactly. With television and radio and everything else, movies, everything is narrow-casted, niche audiences. There's not a lot of mass appeal anymore.
But what's going on in the business of radio that they somehow don't think that radio personalities would be good for business? Instead, we get this kind of like bland playlist kind of nonsense. What's going on in the business of radio in your judgment?
There are 2 things going on. One is the fact that the FCC didn't allow any company to own more than 7 radio stations. 7 a.m. and 7 FM, period. That's all you could own. And somehow in the era of deregulation, going back to Reagan, all those caps, as they were called, maximums, were lifted. So a company called Clear Channel was the first one to buy 1,200 radio stations. Let me repeat that. 1,200 radio stations. And to do that, nobody has that kind of cash. Radio stations sell for double-digit millions. So they, raised money. They leveraged themselves and owed Wall Street tons and tons of money. Then the economy turned around, and they've been desperately trying to keep the stations they have. They're in debt. They're fighting bankruptcy. So you have and everything in show business is show and business. So the business side of it is they're trying to pay the debt, and they're not making it, frankly. So they are laying people off. Every time you open a trade publication, here's 12 more names. And how do they lay people off if you have a station? Well, if you're in Cleveland, you may do your 4-hour show in Cleveland, but you don't go home at the end of that. You sit in a little room and you do 4 hours in the course of 1 hour for Cincinnati, okay? You may not know the names of the streets and you mispronounce the names of the schools and the shopping centers, but it doesn't matter because you could voice track, no music, you just voice, and that's played in by computer between the records. So you're doing 3, 4, 5 radio stations as a talent, and the more they can drop onto your plate and the more they can make the other city slave from your city, the more people they can fire.
Right.
And that's the business side of the show business. The show part of it is, it's been so many years. This Clear Channel thing started in the 90s. So it's been 30 years since somebody actually sat down behind a radio microphone and drew a picture, created the image in people's minds. Howard Stern still does it, and that's why he just signed a contract for $120 million a year for 5 years.
Wow.
Because I worked with Howard back in upstate, in Westchester County, outside of New York City. And that was the era when you could put on the microphone and say whatever you felt was going to be appealing to the listeners, talk about the music, talk about how your day was. If you grew up with WABC, you may remember WNEW FM.
Oh, yeah.
Scott Muni, WNEW.
I was going to ask you, did you know Scott Muni?
I'd met him. Yeah, he was quite a drinker, and
really,
yeah, and he said things he would not like me to repeat 40 years later.
But what? Okay, so WNEW FM. I mean, Scott Muni. I remember Allison Steele, the Nightbird. I mean, kids in my generation, you would put on WNEW FM and you would listen to it all day. I mean, those DJs were so good and so creative. You didn't even have to buy records, because they were playing everything on that station. I guess they called them freeform DJs.
Yeah.
What happened to that, Randy?
Well, those were guys who were given, first of all, the opportunity to pick their own music.
Right.
They were musicologists. They knew the records. They knew the artists. And they would not just, here's a record. They would tell you about the artist or how the song came to be and stuff like that they knew of their own, because they were all very into the music. Secondarily, I'll go back to what I was just talking about when Dennis Elsas and Scott Muni would turn on the microphone. They would talk. There was no 7-second rule. There was no limit on what they could talk about. They were professionals, so they didn't talk themselves into a dark alley, rambling about nothing. They were, personalities who were professionals who paid their dues. So they would open a microphone and weave a tale, tell a story that somehow related to the music, perhaps. So they were personalities, and that has been eschewed or done away with for 30, 40 years now. So people coming up in radio, they read liner cards because, frankly, they don't know what to say to make a picture in the listener's mind, or to say something that's going to make people go, "Wow!"
Right.
So they say it's 4 in a row, and here's Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Exactly. Go ahead, Matt.
It's definitely changed. And you lived through the golden era. You heard me because it was the Admiral Bad Jack, are you naked, baby? And all these guys.
Yeah, they were incredible. I always, I teach a class called The Rhetoric of Rock and Roll, and I kind of feel old because I get to play kind of like a Scott Muni when I teach that class, right? I get to talk about songs I love, and I always tell the younger students these days, it sucks getting old, but I'll tell you, one thing I enjoy is that, Randy, you and I were able to listen to that golden age of radio, and there was nothing like that.
No. It was exciting as hell, and if you felt you weren't listening to that disc jockey that night, you might be missing something.
Exactly right.
You'd be out of touch with in school tomorrow. You wouldn't know what was being said, and you wouldn't know the trends or what you thought at least were the trends. You know, when Cousin Brucey said, "Hey, go down and get the chubby checker twist boots at Tom McCann," you want to go down and get the chubby. I yelled at my mother, "I want the chubby checker twist boots." So we went down to Tom McCann, and they're laced up on the side. She says, "That's not good for your feet. We're not getting those." But you felt like you had to wear, buy, go to whatever the personality was talking about.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I missed that as well. I mean, I had an air shift at WRST, you know, back in the mid '80s, you know, and I kind of, you know, really enjoyed the smooth jazz stuff. But I get to pick whatever it is that I wanted to play, and that was great. And now I actually have a friend who's a station manager, which would actually be a good future interview, a station manager for WOLX in Wisconsin. And I watched how he programmed a show one time, and he says it's really about time, like just finding what fits this little fragment of time, and then you put in your PSA here and whatnot. So it's definitely not like it used to be. Do you ever see it maybe going back? I know that internet radio is kind of taking a big jump right now, but I don't think the classic radio would be coming back to what we used to see. I don't think.
No, the frequencies, actually AM stations are handing over their licenses back to the FCC because they can't make a go of it. Because AM is, you know, nobody's listening much to AM anymore. And that's why Rush Limbaugh is such a massive personality, because he's on these AM stations that nobody would be listening to otherwise. And he attracts an audience and makes those stations viable. Therefore, he's become a very popular personality. But no, radio's not going to go back to that. They'll give up the frequencies and hand it over to taxi cab dispatchers, you know.
Yeah. Do you think that internet radio is going to continue to keep growing?
Absolutely. Internet and podcasts and all this, it's new now in a sense, you know, a few years old, but there are definitely already personalities, people who are really good at, you know, talking behind a microphone and attracting listeners and their personality. So that's the new training ground and the new place that the new wave of personalities will come from, because you don't have a program director screaming at you, read the liner card and shut up. You know, it's their own show.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've always been a fan of Howard Stern. And I saw his Private Parts movie. And I got to tell you, I think Paul Giamatti played his boss's role so well. I mean, like, so incredibly believable. And you felt so bad for this guy. How much of an exaggeration was that?
It's right on. The guy's name, and you call him Pig Vomit in the movie.
Pig Vomit.
I know him. His name was Kevin Mathaney. He's somewhere on the planet still. His father was in radio. He got into radio, and I used to sell syndications to radio stations. And Kevin was a friend, and whenever I was in New York, I call him up and say, "Hey, I'd like to come over. You want to go to lunch or something?" You know, He said, "Come over, but come over at 9:00. I mean, a minute before 9, no later than 9:02. And radio guys, I was there at 8:54, you know, whatever. And sure enough, at 9:02, Imus would come out of the studio. His shift was done, Imus in the morning, and he'd go into Kevin's office. And how was I this morning? Did you hear what I said? Did you? I mean, Kevin would have to do an hour a day holding his hand or other body parts because he was such a. He was, what can I say, so insecure. He was a performer who was very insecure, and at different times in his career, very much on drugs. And Kevin liked to have somebody in the room, the office with him at 9:00. So when Imus came in, he could limit that hour down to like 4 minutes to say, well, I'm in a meeting now. We can maybe do this later. And he'd keep me around until Imus went home. Wow. You know, or if I had to leave, obviously, to run interference. Because it was just crazy. So there was a tremendous amount of anger and difficult relationship with Imus and with Howard. Howard, the same thing, same guy, very similar. Howard liked to know that he was being loved. All performers want to be loved. Yeah. And Howard would go and hang around with Pig Vomit and want to either whine about I'm not being loved enough, or just start being angry with him as a counter way, another way to fill that need,
Sure.
I'm important, I need love, where it's all directed the same. So Kevin Bethany, as a good guy, had problems with his talent because they were high profile and needed to be loved. And your question was pig vomit, in the movie similar to the real life? Yes.
Wow.
They never got along. Got along. And the other thing, let me just to the other side of it. Kevin was working for a huge corporation, NBC. At the time, I think it was owned by RCA or General Electric. It was one or the other. This is big corporate, and Howard Stern going on the radio and talking about lesbians and whatever he would talk about would bring down heat from 60-year-old, executives who have, Wall Street looking up their, well, I won't say looking up their thing, but maybe looking at them. That would be a so there was a lot of heat coming down, and Kevin Pig Vomit was in the middle of this. The executives don't want to. What are you talking about? Lesbians were the flagship station of the National Broadcasting Company. Blah 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 blah. Well, lesbians are getting ratings, and that's what you want. So he was stuck in the middle of it, and it was a difficult time and a difficult place.
Wow. All right, well, I'm gonna jump into your new book. We actually, we brought up the old one, and you can get that on Amazon. Is that correct? Is that available?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can go to my website. You can ask somebody in the street for it or whatever. It's Johnny Olson, A Voice in Time, and what it is isn't really necessarily just a biography of Johnny Olson. Johnny had a 58-year career that paralleled the beginnings of television. He was on radio when radio used to have radio shows and entertainers. Bob Hope and Crosby. He was part of that whole thing. And when television was new, he was one of the experimental broadcasters before television stations were licensed. And then he had a full career after that. So what the book is about is the growth of modern media as lived by this one guy. Because I thought I knew everything about him. And then when he passed away, I got a phone call from his wife's nephew. They had no kids, as I mentioned earlier. And said, "Are you the Randy West who corresponded with Johnny Olson?" Yes. Well, Johnny's been dead now since 85. This is 1999. That's like 14 years. Why would you be calling me now? Well, Penny Olson, his wife, is going into a nursing home. We're cleaning out the house, and we found letters from you and him to you, and vice versa. And you obviously were friendly with him. I said, "My God, I owe him my career." And they said, "Well, how would you like to have some of the things he collected over his 58-year career, things that were important to him?" We, I don't know if they could find a better home than somebody who felt that way about him. We're going to give the kinescopes to the Washington, whatever the hell, the University of Wisconsin, but the personal effects. And I said, "I'll be over in an hour." And he said, "You don't have to do that. I'll send it to you." So then I opened up all his stuff, and there's a book he was writing and never finished. He had the outline. He had a couple of chapters, and I figured, how can I return this guy's favor to me of giving me everything I know I needed to start a career? I'll finish his book. Excellent. So it's his reflections. It's his story of how radio and television came to be, and crazy stories about what went on in studios and all his experiences. So it's not just a biography, it's a story of the history of media as he lived it, and few people did as much as he did.
Is he the greatest of all time, Randy, or would you put like Don Pardo up there on the same level?
I think, well, Don Pardo, if you watched him do warm-up, there wouldn't be a question, because Don Pardo would say, "Hello, everybody, welcome to the studio. If anyone has any questions, we'll be answering them later." In the meantime, in the next studio, Johnny's running up and down the aisle, sitting on women's laps, handing out dollar bills. And, "Hello, where's Cousin Vinny? Hey, how are you? Oh, you look like you've had fun today. Where are you from? I used to live there." And Don is going, "Well, that's right. We've been doing 874 shows in this studio." Johnny, "Hey!" So it was like just a whole different world. So Johnny had the announcer style, and he had that love for people. He said to me, "Randy, don't ever leave a television studio until the last member of the audience leaves also, because these people want to talk to you because you're their ambassador to show business." Never thought of that. Wow. These people can't meet the host. They don't know. They've never been on camera. You're their ambassador to show business. Stay there and answer their questions. It's good for all of us.
Right.
That's brilliant. And I would see him after 58 years. He's still hanging out in the audience. My Uncle Mary once saw you in 1984. And he'd go, oh, that's wonderful. Mary, where does she live now? Oh, what a lovely place. He would entertain all these people who came up. And I said, well, that's the way to do it. And I did maybe 3 weeks of that. And I couldn't wait to get backstage and take off my clothing and get a drink or just lay down. I couldn't do it. And he loves people. He just loved people. So the answer to Don Pardo or Johnny Olson, they both had different styles of announcing, but there was no comparison as far as their personalities.
Wow. So now your follow-up book is going to be a series of stories about various personalities you've met. Is that right?
That's absolutely it. All the backstage stories that nobody's ever heard, nobody's ever seen. Far and away, there's things that I've experienced mostly, and some of those are classic stories that have been told around the industry, but never made it to the public. And yes, it's people saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and they're showing up drunk, and craziness and wild stuff that happens backstage. That everybody always wonders about. What's so-and-so like, and how does that work? Well, it's all in there. I mean, I'm at an age now with a bank account where I can go ahead, fire me if you want. But I am taking a chance. I am taking a chance because I'm exposing some, things that some people wouldn't like known. And some of these people are gone, thankfully, and others hopefully will be gone before it hits the street.
Oh, wow.
And some of it is really kind and loving, and giving credit where credit is due, because there are some wonderful people in the business too, and we talk about them as well. But it's mostly about people who put their foot in their mouth, said the wrong things. Andy Rooney was kicked off of 60 Minutes because he went on some diatribe about, how could I clean this up now? About a certain minority and stereotypical behavior. He was shooting off his mouth about stuff that was appropriate. How old was Andy Rooney? He was 80 when he was on television, Mm-hmm. So he started in the 30s and 40s. He was a World War II correspondent. So he was talking about stuff that related perhaps to folks in that era, but was so politically incorrect by the time he started shooting off his mouth that it was just, he was suspended from CBS and other people in similar situations who said the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Wow. I now the Pyramid Game show is back on. Is that Alec Baldwin's hosting that one now?
Baldwin, yeah.
And but I understand that you've got a little bit of history with that show, and that there's a little behind the scenes story. And I've heard it before, but I think the way you tell it is best, and I think our listeners will enjoy this. So
it's a classic, and I would almost question it if I hadn't seen it in person. My own self. I did shows for Bob Stewart Productions and his son Sandy Stewart, which is how I got to know these producers. And I was in the booth one day when they were doing Pyramid, the $100,000 Pyramid, and the host of the show, as we all know, was Dick Clark. And among the announcers, Don Pardo and Johnny Olson was an announcer named Jack Clark. He hosted some shows. He was the announcer on Wheel of Fortune for a period, and he happened to be assigned to that show. So strangely, you had Dick Clark hosting and Jack Clark as the announcer / warm-up personality who would talk to the audience while the host was changing clothes between episodes. Dick did 10 episodes a day, which is still the all-time record. So he would disappear like for 5 minutes, and Jack would come out and say, hey, everybody, isn't that fun? Where are you from? And, make small talk. And when it was time for Dick Clark to come out, they had no time to waste. The crew at the end of 10 shows was going to be on overtime, which they were happy to do, but they didn't want to waste any moments.
Sure.
So it was critical that when the stage manager said to the booth, we're ready, the word from the booth would go down to the second stage manager who had the eye line with Jack Clark. And the message was that Dick Clark's ready. So what they came to say, instead of the shorthand of, oh, Dick Clark is dressed and ready to go, Mr. Jack Clark, if you would wrap up your act now, that would be great. Well, after the first 5 days of doing that, it just became a very simple shorthand to say, right, get Dick out and Jack off. Because you had Dick Clark and Jack Clark, so it was get Dick out and Jack off.
Oh, my goodness.
You could hear that for 100 times and still find it funny.
Wow.
Well, I actually think that's a really good way to kind of bring everything to a close. Randy, seriously, it's been an amazing time chatting with you, and thank you for the stories and the information. And it's just good connecting with you again, man.
Oh my God, I've missed you terribly. We've had so much fun doing those live casino shows, and I miss it so much.
Yeah,
so
and
hopefully we'll be back at it again before too long.
Hopefully
Everybody wear a mask so we can get the hell back into the studios and back
absolutely
on the road again.
Yeah. Tony, you got anything? Any
well, I
thoughts?
just want to thank you, Randy, for being with us. I mean, you have obviously worked with so many people, and you know, like your mentor Johnny Olson, you seem to bring so much love into what you do, and that's just
what I always wanted to do. I never thought I could get to do it, and now that I am, I still have to pinch myself. I've never lost the passion, so I'm
That's
glad
amazing.
it shows.
It does show, yeah, and it's really beautiful to listen to, and we're gonna promote your books. I can't wait to read the Johnny Olson story. And when does your follow-up come out?
Well, we're talking with publishers now, so next year, sure, in 2021. Okay. I can't give you a firm date, but I'll certainly let the world know.
Yeah, let us know, and we'll promote it for you, man. I cannot wait to read that. I mean, I've heard some of those stories, and for anybody that doesn't end up buying the book, you're missing a whole lot, especially if you like stories about Hollywood, because I've heard a couple of these in person, and they are priceless. They are priceless.
Nice.
All right.
Great being with you guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
so much,
Randy.
Bye-bye.
Tony, man, I really enjoyed today's interview. That was so much fun.
You know, I did too, and Randy represents, I think, a set of media values that, you know, too often we don't see in the modern media landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's passionate about what he does, and I mean, he met so many of these personalities that we grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah, in his new book, you're going to find out all the people that he's met and been backstage with and announced for and worked with on set. He is an absolute living legend in the realm of announcing in Hollywood. So fortunate to have him on the show, and really fortunate to be working with him and to be able to call him a friend.
Because you don't see those guys, you don't realize how important they are, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, what he was telling us about, like Johnny Olson working the crowd,
mm-hmm.
and I know that Randy has done that at your shows. I mean, that's like so incredibly important to the success of a performance, is it not?
It's absolutely critical. And when we started doing stuff a long time ago, I never really had a warm-up person. We kind of came out, and I did a couple of little, oohs and ahs warm-ups, and we jumped into the show. But he'll come out and we'll 10, 15 minutes of, either giveaways or just fun things to get people excited, jokes. And then I get introduced and he takes the stage. And so that personality that created all that initial energy still is on stage with me and keeps it going. Because if there is ever a lull, which typically during our shows, there's not, but he absolutely knows the perfect time to fill it, jump in with a comment. And what's really incredible is at the end of the show, he gets to go out to the audience and interact with a lot of the audience members too. And it's cool. I'm the host of the show, but after the show's over, so many people have seen him with Price is Right. I mean, he's been doing that for 17 years. A lot of people kind of, come up and want to chat and get an autograph or shake his hand and see him. So I can't wait till we get back to that. It's really, it's been an honor, in that situation with him, and he is 100% a consummate professional.
Oh yeah. Well, again, it was really great to talk to him, and I am looking forward to looking at his books. I mean, these are like serious books.
Yeah, this could actually become part of the curriculum up there in the radio and TV department. I think people would absolutely learn something from this, especially the transition of, what took Johnny Olson from the beginning till, when his career ended, and then, Randy kind of picking up where that left off. That's some really good insight. And unfortunately, it's the way that it used to be is not the way it is, and I don't think the way it ever will be again. But to be able to, it's really a history book, to be able to look back and see, wow, this was like a real thing that people did. Like if you watch The Price is Right now, for example, you get like you win a new car, and it's like a 2018, whatever it is, and then the way that they used to do it was there was a story behind every single prize,
Exactly.
and that just, it's not there anymore. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, but for those folks that enjoyed the classic game shows, I really enjoy, like the story behind Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat, whatever that was. So, yeah, check out the books. We'll have links to those below.
Yep,
please remember to subscribe and like, and we thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to this episode. And we'll see everybody next time. Stay elevated, everybody.
Running on Empty with Matt and Tony.